Hello, my name is Peter Cinnamon, and you're very welcome to this. It's a podcast, and it's all about the Irish League. We're one of the most anticipated announcements this century when it comes to the Irish League. It's finally out. After a decade plus of waiting, the first of what could be many steps have taken place in regards to the NI Football Fund. There were some big winners, and there was some high-profile absentees from those lists. We're going to recap it all, as well as ask what the future may hold and what could be the start of a facilities revolution within the Irish League. If and when, of course, it hits the club's bank accounts. It's another one of those special episodes of your weekly edition of Kick and Match. Yes, indeed, something slightly different this week. We're going to kick off talking about money, talking about the NI Football Fund. But one thing that we're not going to be covering this week, which I wanted to say right here at the top, is that we're going to be no game reviews or previews. I've been doing this, for 3 and a bit years now. It's my 4th series, and I've only missed a week once. I've been here every week, Christmas, whatever, but unfortunately, just the way things have fallen this week due to commitments elsewhere, I'm not going to be able to have time to kind of record it or have seen all the games or just be too late. So I have got the most up-to-date things. We're talking about all the stuff with the NI Football Fund, and then as a token of my gratitude for you listening, so we've got an episode this week, I'm going to have 2. I'm going to have a big interview coming up later on this week, which I think you will really enjoy. So 2 for 1 this week, and then I'll be back in action next week. So stick around, because I think this is a really good chat all about the NI Football Fund. It's rather exciting to bring to the podcast the first time a debutant. I think you'll know his account, but you might not know his name. His name is Vennard. He is the man behind Niffle Grounds on X or Twitter or whatever we're calling it. This man knows a thing or two about grounds in Northern Ireland and proposed grounds and stands and everything else. And on Thursday, ahead of the NI Football Fund reveal, it was his Christmas. So I thought this was the perfect man to bring in and unwrap these little presents that have been delivered, or at least pointed towards happening over the next while. Hello, Aaron.
Peter, thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, not quite Christmas. Feels a little bit more like Easter, more Easter eggs than giant presents, I'm afraid.
Well, it took 14 years to get here.
Yeah, I know. I sort of did like a rough calculation of this as well, just sort of considering inflation and everything. And, when you think about 30, 33, 36 million 14 years ago, and based on the different sort of percentages of contributions, it's now worth 17 million pound less in terms of construction project value. So how much damage or good it will do remains to be seen.
We finally got here when the Minister for Communities, Gordon Lyons, was revealing it. It's all quite tense. We were told about the tiers. I don't know how well people knew about these tiers, but there was 3 tiers, which you can think about as the 1.5 million and below. You have then the middle tier of 1.5 million to 6 million, and then you have the big boy tier of 6 million to infinity. There clearly is an infinity amount of money, but some would probably look at all these teams that have been awarded progress in the next phase of the scheme and say Cliftonville and Glentoran, the big winners, because they're both the 2 clubs that have been selected in this top tier of 6 million plus. Slightly surprising or not?
Glentoran, no. I think given if you think under the old regime and the sub-regional stadia funding, Glentoran were always in line to get the biggest piece. And in the last 14 years, I don't think anyone thinks the Oval has got better. So that was always going to be the case. I think
a fine wine it is not.
That is true. And then Cliftonville as well, definitely have I guess have the potential to be so much bigger, but are limited by the size of Solitude. I think obviously when you think 8 clubs applied for that top tier of funding, and it does feel like it was all or nothing. So any of the clubs that applied for the top tier and were not successful, were not able to, fall down into the next tier and sort of break up their projects. So you would imagine Portadown and Crusaders and Coleraine probably Institute and Ards might have been in that top tier as well. Thinking that Ards and Institute certainly to build an entire new ground would probably need £6 million. So I think the only surprise, the biggest surprise, is obviously Derry City. Um, I suppose sort of politically at the time when sub-regional stadia funding was first proposed, we had Martin McGuinness and Peter Robinson, the Chuckle brothers in Stormont, and when this sort of happened, the Glentoran were eyeballed for 10 million, and at the same time Derry City got SIF funding to help start the Mark Farron stand. So I guess the assumption, certainly for those in Derry, was that the money would eventually come back to them to complete that stand. And certainly the support that arguably Derry City are the biggest club in Northern Ireland. So certainly fan base, the number of fans they can bring to an FII Cup final is no other club can really compete with that in the Irish League. So that's probably the biggest surprise.
There is absolutely two sides to this story, and that being the clubs who have progressed to the next round, and those who, for at least now, have missed out. Quite a lot of teams overall have went through. It's not a select few. There was a lot of talk before this awarding or this announcement that we may see a lot of teams miss out completely because there's only a few that were going to be able to get it overall. I'm counting, what is it, 30 or sorry, 20 teams have got and 38 applied.
Yeah, I'm actually more surprised that so many were included. I think 36 million was really 33 million, given that 3 million had been set aside for the National Training Centre. So I definitely recognize that the now new tally of 80 million seems much more suitable for what is needed. But I'm surprised that so many clubs were included, given Glentoran were seeking 28 million. I think Colerane's seeking something 11 million, probably Derry City something similar. So if those three clubs had got what they needed, every other club would have got nothing. So to see 20 clubs included is actually is quite promising.
Just to reveal the teams that have went through, because we keep saying next round because this money isn't there yet, even though this felt like the big moment. These are just teams whose applications are going to another round of assessment. Is that right?
Yeah, it feels like 7 levels of a job interview. And it's, when you look at the 7 steps, it does feel like we're still 2 years away from any club putting a shovel in the ground. So yeah, they've gone through this first criteria based assessment, and then they've got to go through, I guess, business case, and also probably cross the T's, dot the I's.
Yeah, the next stage will now see project values, impact of football community, budget, and financial controls. They're all being assessed. Means night to me, but I'm sure for all the people who are going through these, no doubt, extensive forms, it will mean something. So there's no guarantee money is going to be there. What we do know is the teams who aren't going to be considering get money on this occasion. So the ones in tier 1, which we talked about, is below 1.5 million. We have Armagh City, Ballymacash, Lisburn Distillery, Queens, and Rathryland. So that's fairly minor works overall if they get across the line.
Yeah, I'm not sure what some of the clubs have planned, because all of those of the 20, not all of them have planning permission or have any sort of design. I would imagine maybe Queens might be seeking floodlights. They don't have floodlighting. And this has always been a sort of pet peeve for myself. I think every club in the top three divisions should have floodlights.
It feels like that's a direction of
We
travel with
should.
the new championship and top flight Irish
Yeah,
League.
yeah, this is it. And this is also the ground is changing beneath the funding, because we're going to have the new conference league. Um, so everything's changing. Armagh City, I would imagine a new stand, or they're going to replace but I've not seen any plans there. I think probably some of the clubs Ballymacash certainly have plans. They've done so much work already, but they do have plans for a new stand. And I believe Rathfriland, they might be seeking a 3G
Yeah.
pitch.
The
Um,
main chunk, I think it's 15, probably, maybe I've got that wrong, but up to 6 million, it's 1.5 to 6 is Ballinamallard, Ballymena, Banbridge Town. Yes, these are in alphabetical order. Bangor, Carrick, Dergview, Dungannon Swifts, Glenavon, Larne, Lisburn Rangers, Loughgall, Newry, and Oxford Sunnyside. I put emphasis on Lisburn Rangers because they are beginning to look like potentially the outlier here.
yes, they are not in the top three divisions. They do have plans for a new clubhouse, also a sort of small business.
So before today, you could have told me where Lisbon Rangers play their games
Yeah, is it Paisley or Stanley?
because they're also a women's team.
Well, this is it. So I think when Deirdre Harvey took over the community minister role, she did actually suggest like setting aside 2 million of sub-regional stadia funding for women's football. Yeah, you could see why Lisbon Rangers then would be included, and they do have great plans for the ground, so it does make sense. But I guess those in the West will certainly suggest that the funding does seem to be heavy on Greater Belfast.
Yes, so Lisbon Rangers is an amateur league team, in case anybody is interested, but are at least the women's team are much more successful playing in the top flight against many of the teams that you listing out there will support: the Glentorans, the Cliftonvilles, and the like. But yeah, and then as we said, they're Cliftonville, Glentoran. They're getting big money, or at least they are getting through to potentially get that big money. And we all know what that will look like. We don't know what the specifics are. You probably have got some sort of blueprint hidden somewhere on a drive. But for us, we know broadly Glentoran is going to totally revolutionize what the oval looks like to this day, despite people talking about some of the quirks that it has. And then Cliftonville, we've been staring at that white elephant of a stand for almost as long as I can remember. Feels almost like 2 decades.
Yeah, certainly Glentoran look to be two new stands. Obviously, the railway stand's going to go replaced with, I think, in the region of 1,000 to 1,500 seats, and then the main stand looks incredible, 3,000 seats, and then effectively maintaining the terrace behind the goal. Probably, I guess regrading the terrace behind the goal. Maybe in the future they could put in rail seating so that they could reach 8,000 capacity for European games. But Cliftonville, it's an unknown. They had a previous planning application that has since expired, and it likely wasn't big enough. I think they had plans for like 1,200 seats, but I think many Cliftonville fans would say that we need 2,000 seats.
Is there any of those projects that I've referenced that particularly stand out as, oh, I think they might be doing this or they might be doing that? I've seen a few bits and pieces come through. I've seen Glenavon talking about how they're, 'cause people might look at Glenavon and go, well, they've got two fairly sturdy stands, but they are talking about, and a pitch that's very highly regarded. It looks as though they're going to use any money that they get into revolutionizing their changing room facilities, as well as looking at some sort of community hub. So it's not just pitches and stands.
No, there's definitely more to it. I think Gordon Lyons did reference this in one of his interviews that, almost like much the same as at church, a football stadium can no longer just be used on a Friday and Saturday night, which makes perfect sense. We need, for sustainability, every club should have people in and out of the ground every single day, and that comes from having more community purpose. Um, so yeah, I can't think of any club that really strikes me as surprising. I would fear for some clubs that recently have had financial difficulties in getting through to the next stage with respect to their plans. I would also say maybe not considered in the criteria, but I was quite disappointed with Coleraine not getting, just because Coleraine is the host for one of the largest youth tournaments in the world, and bringing the next David Beckham to the showgrounds might not have the same appeal if the ground doesn't see some sort of modernization. So that does concerning me a little bit because it does sort of put Northern Ireland on somewhat of an international stage. Yeah, and then you think sub-regional stadia funding maybe in its birth was for regional teams, not necessarily Belfast teams, but those on the border. So I'm quite glad that Dergview and Ballymallard are on that list. We think of teams in the West. There's a bit of a 3G desert over there. There's not enough training facilities. This is quite infamous, really. They don't have enough 3G facilities. I think Dergview are planning a 3G pitch and a new changing facility. This makes perfect sense, given the amount of flooding. The Derg, sometimes overflows, and a grass pitch doesn't dry out as quickly as a 3G pitch. But also just in terms of catching players, maybe for the future senior team, the national team. We were lucky to get Connor Bradley, but if we have three teams in that region, like Dungannon, Ballymallard, and Dergview, that have facilities that can hopefully help, catch players, develop them, it can only be a good thing.
Some of the reaction to this has been polarizing, in the sense that we have Rory Higgins coming out and pretty much saying that the northwest of the country, to quote him, has been shafted again. You might say it is sour grapes because of my connection to Coleraine and Derry. But he then talks about Institute and their situation, which is a very different one. And Ards is also one that probably people had eyes on. And for me, I just didn't know where the likes of Ards and Institute were going to sit within this funding. Was it too little and too soon for them? Clearly from, and you can see it in the media, talk from Institute's chairman, they're crestfallen. They're very disappointed. So clearly they thought this was their opportunity to finally move on from Drumahoe, which they're now out of since 2017.
Yeah, I think Institute are unfortunate in that they lost their ground through natural causes, through a flood, and then they had that sort of Japanese knotweed that took over the ground. So really, a natural disaster is the reason why they're homeless. Ards obviously had a different path to homelessness, but they both have land, and they have land to develop. I think if they didn't have that, they wouldn't have been considered or even worthy of an application. But they both have land to develop. Institute in they're developing a Clooney development in the Clooney area, and then obviously Ards down by the floodgates. So they have land to develop. I guess possibly, given Cliftonville and Glentoran were successful in Tier 1, that eliminated every other application. And you would imagine Institute and Ards building an entire new ground would require at least 6 million. A 3G pitch these days likely costs 1.5 million. So you can see where they've fallen, really.
And by some reports, it looks as though Institute have went for that 6 million, and they've went that third tier and they've missed out. Other clubs that have missed out, as we said, there, Coleraine didn't get it. We don't know the status of Crusaders. It's very unlikely in regards to need. That Linfield didn't really fit in, but a club close to your heart and who have been quite proactive in letting people know where their direction of travel is when it comes to their ground, again, a 3G pitch is Portadown. To completely miss out there, it's one that's probably not getting as much attention as others.
Yeah, I think ports have been really unfortunate. I think we talk about I suppose I would still think of Portadown from the 90s when we could just easily attract 78,000 should we have a cup final. And I do sort of fear that missing out on that ability to finish off the ground effectively, because the plans that the ports have had to build a stand on the where the old stand currently sits, those plans have been out there for 15 years. And then obviously everyone knows the pitch does tail off into one corner and it's still pretty far away from the away stand. And the plan was to have a 3G pitch there, and then that would obviously allow the stadium to get used outside of Friday and Saturday. So it's really disappointing. And like you said, they've been incredibly vocal. If you can't really claim sort of politics in this really because they've had DUP, MLA sort of backing all of their plans. And much the same as Institute, I've seen Gregory Campbell at Institute games. So it's just a case there's just not enough money to go around. And I would say this time with the NI Football Fund, there does seem to be with the scoring credentials or criteria, that seems a lot better than what was previously in place with sub-regional stadia funding, where you think even Ballymoney was listed as a designated stadium up there with Windsor Park. So no disrespect to Ballymoney United, obviously, but I would imagine the criteria results will have to come out. And I think once they do come out, I think a lot of people will probably accept the rationale behind it.
Let's then talk about this storm in the northwest, where many senior figures, both within football and beyond, have talked about how if you were to put these all on a map, you would see that. I mean, is it technically Ballymena the most northwestern club? Corey miss out, Derry City miss out, Institute miss out. I don't know what the status was, if maybe Limavady applied or not. Ditto for Strabane Athletic.
Coke.
Yeah, so no representation there. The minister's been really clear in saying that this was a completely independent process, nothing to do with him, and it was all done by a panel with all these various different factors, and there was a score table, etc. But you talked about it earlier there. The feeling going into today was, well, Derry and Glentoran are likely to suck up a lot. The question will be how much that will be, and then how much is left for everybody else. So to see Derry City, despite them being in the League of Ireland, completely miss out because it's a Northern Ireland fund, not a Irish League fund, it really was quite a shock.
Yeah, I certainly, to a certain extent, agree with all of the grievances. I think Institute, Coleraine, I suspect Limavady did still have plans to install a 3G pitch, Coke, and Strabane Athletic as well, all have plans, and so for all five or six clubs to miss out is disappointing. I know some will say, well, Derry City have recently developed a new stand. They have a billionaire chairman, but I think there is an argument with respect to equity and people in Derry having equity in, you might call it Project Northern Ireland or whatever. And certainly, as a Northern Ireland fan, I always worry about potentially losing players to the Republic of Ireland. And I think perception is everything. And I think if people in Derry believe that they're not necessarily part of the project, you might see more players or go south for their footballing dreams or aspirations. And again, I said we were lucky to catch Connor Bradley in what is sort of a football desert in terms of facilities. And I think certainly sponsoring Derry City or the Brandywell does feel like a missed opportunity just for Northern Ireland in general.
I think you're highlighting that you perhaps feel as though this is a significantly bad situation optically.
Yeah, perception is
For the
everything.
storm for the Stormont government.
Yeah, I think perception is everything. Whether it's real or not, perception is everything, and this is a bit of a PR disaster, you might say.
So it'll be interesting of how then long it takes to get to this next step, what that looks like. Because I've talked to people who are connected to both Glentoran and Cliftonville, others who I'm saying, great, this is going to be great for you guys. We should be really positive, and they're still tentative about it. They're saying there's still a wee bit way to go here, and they are right, aren't they? We are not home and hosed by a long shot.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think it still feels like we're 2 years away. You know, government funding applications take forever. Government is slow, and then with the Northern Ireland Assembly, will it still be there? Will it still be up and running at the point funding needs to be signed off? That final check needs to be signed. Will there be someone there to sign it? Or will the civil service have the autonomy should the Stormont collapse? Hopefully not, obviously, but so until it's done, it isn't done really.
Out of all those names, is there any projects perhaps you just want to highlight that might be of interest generally across the league?
I suppose I mentioned sort of Ballymallard and Castle and Dergview. I think Dergview is somewhat of an outlier. It's is probably as far west as you can go. I suppose they have produced legends like Richard Clark from Castleberg and Ivan Sproul, and maybe there's another gem out there, and they need a facility to unlock that or identify that. Obviously, disappointed about the ports. Ballymena United is an interesting one as well because
Council owned.
yeah, that and also their plans and this was before the National Training Center was announced for Galgorm, and the showgrounds they had identified or planned to build a facility for the what I guess they had spoken to the IFA about this, but a facility for the national women's team. And I'm not so sure they would need that bit if the National Training Center is just up the road. Um, so that's a bit of a confusing one. I should say as well, Derry City, should they complete the plans that they currently have, imagine they had received the funding, their capacity would still fall short to host group games in Europe should they qualify. They would still have to travel down to Tala to play their games. So I suppose the argument now for Derry City fans is we should be looking at a new site. The Brandywell is probably um, sort of past its functional use at this point.
What would you say to people? Because by all accounts, this was done by how need was a clear factor in there, and when people see Derry and Coleraine miss out, some might say, well, there has been investment there in that club. They do have people with significantly deep pockets to cover the costs, where other clubs maybe don't have that. I know Glentoran is over in the corner that probably looks very similar to that in regards to the money Ali Poor has, and then has subsequently invested in the club. But what do you make of those discussions?
Yeah, I suppose that wasn't necessarily part of the criteria, but I get it. Again, I suppose, Derry City, absolutely, they have a billionaire chairman. He has put money into the Brandywell in terms of the new stand behind the goal. But I think there's still, I'm not from Derry, but I think there's still a point there about equity, and we shouldn't have to put our hands into our own pockets again when this is something we should get just by being part of Northern Ireland. Um, Coleraine, this will be a test as to how deep their pockets are. Larne, I can see why they were included because part of their criteria was how much have you invested in your own ground, and obviously Kenny Bruce is no longer there, but he put millions into that into Inver Park, and there's a dream to complete it. And I think probably there's a solid argument there that again they should get equity outside of the clubs in Belfast. Yeah, so I can't really disagree with it. And then there's so many secret millionaires anyway. McBurney's been sponsoring Ballymena for years. Carrick have an ownership group. Cliftonville fans will say millionaire club owners shouldn't be getting funding while they're going through millionaire potentially takeover. So
Mm.
um, half the league will have millionaire investment. So that argument sort of goes out the window at this point.
Aaron, the one thing I think I've taken from this is that we're closer, but we still feel slightly far. And of course, what will it mean long term? Because there's clubs who've missed out, who have been told, don't worry about it, chill out. There's still potentially money coming down the line. But just based on the history of, it took 14 years for us to get here, there will be many, you can call them skeptics if you want, who will feel, until we see the colour of the money and more coming through. And the one thing we probably haven't talked about a lot with this fund is that some of the commitments here far exceed the money that is currently available.
Yeah, I think we're all in the same boat here. We're all skeptics. It's 36 million 11 years ago was never enough, just wasn't. Uh, and you might say the 82 million that's going to be divvied out, where the extra 50 million comes from, another story. That still isn't enough. And I think, looking at the pyramid of football in Northern Ireland, Gordon Lyons said we need 200 million. And, he is the Minister for Communities. Communities is responsible for building homes as well. And there's 50,000 people, 50,000 applicants on the housing waiting list in Northern Ireland. So I don't think the money's going to come directly from a departmental budget. It will have to come from being really flirtatious in Westminster, and trying to decant money from London. But I don't see it coming anytime soon. And I've said many times that in Northern Ireland everything requires balance, and I was a supporter of Casement Park. Obviously, I wanted to see Northern Ireland host the Euros, but I recognize that the only way football gets all of the money that it needs, the 200 million, if there is a counterbalance on the other political side, and that would have been funding Casement. And the argument for funding football would have been so much easier, especially when the Minister for Finance is a member of Sinn Féin. And it would have been an easier argument to maybe get £10 million a year for 10 years rather than one lump sum. I think that money could have been fine, but without that sort of counterbalance, I don't see how the politics deliver the extra money that we need, and certainly not within the next 10 years.
Well, in Northern Ireland at the minute, sport is not the only mouth looking fed. Health, you said, housing there, education, infrastructure as well. There is not a lot of money, but plenty of need. Look, today was a long time coming. This podcast is in its 4th year, and I feel like we've talked about the idea of the football fund, which we eventually known it to be called, this event, this funding coming, was something we talked about for ages. So now that we're here, we're in a different world, and how that looks, we don't know. And no doubt, as with most things that is in the Irish League, we will talk about it again and again and again. But I really appreciate Aaron sitting down and giving us some really vital insight. And perhaps we'll be talking again sometime soon.
Yeah, pencil me in for this date 10 years from now and see where we're at.
Fantastic. Aaron, thanks for your time.
Peter, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. As I said, near at the top there, second episode coming up later this week, and it's going to be with Michael Carville. A nice big sit down with him recorded where he was talking about so many things, his career, why the PFA is important, some of the big issues they are tackling, which includes for players, mental health, gambling addiction, just overall health when it comes to concussions. Lots of topics being covered, as well as the wee float through his career. Great chat. If you're here, you're new here, and you want to follow this, you can. It's Kick a Match on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, even TikTok. Just search Kick a Match, one word. I've got them all. Full flow next week. Sorry about it this time that we weren't able to chat about the big two and all the rest that happened there. Del Clasico, should be saying that big two. But yes, enjoy your week, and I'll see you later on.